Right now in the media, there's a lot of talk of recession. You know, you've got interest rates on the rise, and there's also some talk about the Silicon Valley Bank and needing a bailout and all those types of details. And so everybody's wondering, are we headed for a recession? But that's not the recession I want to talk about. Have you heard of the friendship recession? According to a new survey conducted by the Survey Center on American Life, says the percentage of men who have at least 6 close friends has been cut in half since 1990. Yeah, from 55% to 27%. The study also found that the percentage of men who have no close friends jumped from 3% to 15%. That's a 5-fold increase. In just 30 years, men are reporting having way less friendships. And the friendships they do have, studies say that they're way less emotionally connected than ever before. What is going on? As I look at my own life, I see this everywhere. Let's be honest. Men oftentimes have struggled having deep, meaningful friendships, the ones that you can kind of rely on in times of need. Why is this? Well, think about some of the conversations we have when we're together. We talk about, how's work? Busy. How are the kids doing in school or their hobbies? We talk about sports or politics or, the latest meme on the internet. Is it possible to break beneath that surface and have deep, meaningful relationships with other men? I think so, but it's going to take relational work. Is it worth all the work? Definitely. In Ecclesiastes 4:9-10, it says this: 2 people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls down, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be the kind of guy that falls and has no one around him to help him. And I don't want that for my friends. We're better together. On today's episode, Andrew and I talk about what it takes to build meaningful relationships with other men and some of the barriers that get in our way. We also talk on the spaces that we can build to be reliable, intentional, and vulnerable. And we truly believe this will be a help to you as you navigate this yourself. Let's jump right in. Andrew, man, thanks for being with us. It's so good to have you back, man.
It's always good to be here.
Andrew, we're in our new office space, which has been long awaited. And what do you think?
Yeah, I'm stoked about it. You got a lot of space to do some cool stuff in here, so it's great to be here.
Yeah, we're hoping over the next couple of months to actually kind of, if you follow us on social media, which we hope you do, that space should be changing a little bit over the next couple of months, and we're hoping to kind of have a fresh new look. But that's all I'll tell you for now. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe so you get to keep up.
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook. And man, listen, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to just give it a plug here. We give a daily devotional via email every single day. Gentlemen, there's no reason not to have a daily devotional in your inbox.
How do you do that? Because I don't even know if I get those.
Wow. Impactus.org. You can find all the details there and subscribe.
Awesome.
And it's a tremendous resource for anyone that's looking for a daily devotional. But anyway, we're not talking about daily devotionals today. We're talking about friendship. But before we do that, actually, we just got back from 2 conferences in Edmonton and Winnipeg.
That's right. How did those go?
Honestly, it was a riot, man. We had a good time, a riot in a good sense of the word.
Yeah.
Can you imagine we had a conference and it was a riot? No, we did Ottawa and Cambridge earlier in the fall.
Yeah, I was at Cambridge and it was an awesome time. And was that the first time you guys are getting back into conferences after COVID, and this is kind of the first time rolling them out, huh?
Yeah, and it's my first time kind of being involved in them as somewhat of a new staff, and so it's just been a bit of a whirlwind, big learning curve. But we went out west to Edmonton, which was just amazing. We had 500 guys.
Amazing.
And it was in a smaller venue, and they were all very close, and so it just felt really cool and intimate, and the guys just were really going after God. And then we went over to Winnipeg, and we tried something new called an after party. So we had like corn dogs, right?
Let's go.
Not corn dogs. Chili dogs. And we had cornhole, the game. You ever play cornhole?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm terrible at it. And we had a mechanical bull, fire pits, and so it was a totally different model.
So Winnipeg's the place to be, eh?
Winnipeg was really special. We had 1,000 guys show up.
Winnipeg, good for you.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. Just the Lord did a ton of stuff.
Amazing.
Yeah. Some of the highlights I think for me were with Winnipeg in particular, and Edmonton too, was just every now and then we ask the men that lead men's groups to just stand up, and we just look around the room, and I met these guys that have been just leading a men's small group for 25 years. These
saints, real life saints
that have just been in the trenches. We get to fly into these communities, right? And we get to, come in and we get to fly home. But there's men on the ground that have been leading a men's small group for years and years. And that to me is just so inspiring as I think about I don't know if you've ever ran a small group or a small group just for men. It can be tough.
Yeah, for men especially, like you just have these like ebbs and flows and these weird seasons. So to stick with it for more than a couple of years, it always impresses me to see the guys who are like, no matter what, no matter who's around, no matter who's coming and who's going, no matter the season of life the church that is in, like we're sticking with this. It's always amazing to me.
Yeah,
it tells me the health of a church when you see that.
Totally, and just these guys that are just been faithful to building a community of men, because it's one of these things where I get a sense whenever we go to these conferences, one of the main takeaways that I've seen over the past 4 that I've been to, it seems that there's a real desire for men to have deep friendships, but men struggle having deep friendships.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
That's the secret. The secret is we won't say that because that's weird and awkward, and we don't want to be that guy who says, hey, I'm lonely and I want friends. But like the reality is like, yeah, even myself, I pride myself on having lots of friends, and people see me as somebody who like has a collection of friends, and I find myself sitting there like on weekends sometimes, or like just in the throes of like daily life with kids and parenting and all that, just feeling lonely, feeling like, man, I just want to like hang out with a friend. I don't even know who to call. I don't even know what to go do. It's it's a very real reality.
Yeah, it's funny. What I also see is like a lot of men envious of their wives' relationships with their friends. It's like you see the wives hanging out, or they're going out and having dinner, or whatever the case may be, or they're going on these. Do wives have play dates? Like what do you?
They go to spas and stuff. I don't. Side note: some of my closest friends started to go to spas together. Okay. Apparently, this is a new thing guys are doing. Maybe we'll talk about it in a little bit. But
dude spas?
Well, just your run-of-the-mill spas, like your Nordic spa or whatever.
Okay.
But like a bro day at the spa, apparently it's becoming a thing. And like they're having a great time. I haven't been yet, but we're planning on going. And it's like,
dude,
that's what our wives would do. They would go, they actually plan things and they're intentional about them. And they go places and they put it on a calendar months in advance, right? And we just don't do that. And then we get jealous that they actually have friends and we don't.
I will say this, I'll admit to the World Wide Web. I went to my barber the other day and she did like a straight razor shave on my face. And the time before, she put this like hot towel on my face and she put this machine that like sprayed steam on my face, and she just called it a facial or whatever. So the second time I went in, I was like, hey, can we get a shave again? And can I get that facial thing? She said, yeah, sure. But what she heard was that I wanted the most expensive facial they have on this like menu. So I went in for a $25 haircut and I left paying $100.
Jordan.
But my face, man, I'm a believer in these. Anyway, I might head to the spa with you guys. That was quite something. But it's interesting, Andrew, that we're talking about this because recently there's been a lot of talk of like recession and like, you know, you'd see that SVB bank that just kind of went through some troubles in the States, and you're hearing a lot about like, oh, are we headed into a recession? But one of the words that's been common over the past while is the idea of a male friendship recession. The amount of men that have had 6 close friends has been cut in half since 1990.
Why? What are they saying?
Well, there's a ton of things that people are saying. Some is that like men are living at home longer than usual. And so to me though, that kind of struck me by surprise, because I feel like guys who are maybe living at home still have more time to make friends.
Yeah. What I've noticed is like guys, at least this is for younger men, guys living at home longer, like they have these like interesting friendships that I feel like I'm missing out on because I got married and have kids now in my late 20s, and so they're on Discord and they're on every night and they're watching movies together on Discord and they're going on spa dates and stuff like that, like, but they're not like these long lasting friends. They're just kind of like friendships for a season. And what's weird about young adulthood is like just everything changes when your season of life in regards to your marital status change, in regards to your parenting status changes, right? And so like they're almost like these hold on to, you know, friendships while we're like filling the gap until like this new season of life. But then you kind of lose those friendships a little bit, because when your season of life changes, like your whole schedule, your weekly rhythms are totally thrown, and then you're totally disjointed from those who aren't in that season of life.
Totally. I think I see it a lot of times in young adult groups in churches where, you know, the young adult group they come in, they kind of have this graduating class together. Mm-hmm. They're all close friends, but then like 2 or 3 of them get, you know, married. And now you have a young adult group that has like young marrieds and then singles. And then you have some of those married people in a couple of years, they have kids. So then you've got young marrieds with kids, young marrieds without kids. And then you have couples that are not married yet and then singles. And it's just so interesting in those early years of even manhood. Your friend group can change so quickly.
Yeah.
But the one thing that's interesting about this is, the one thing that I think maybe this study is not taking into consideration is how friendships are formed so differently now. Like when I wonder if when they're talking about friendships, if they're talking about like real flesh and blood friendships. Because I think like social media, I love collecting vintage furniture. I think we've talked about that before. I have friends on social media that I have never seen in person, but I actually chat with them like more than I kind of chat with even like you, because I'm chatting all day. We're sending links or memes back and forth to one another. And so I'd be interested to know if they're just talking about like real life friends, or like how many guys do I know that game a lot and they have like a friend of mine, he became friends with some guy that he was gaming with online. And they were best friends for years. And eventually this guy worked for Google many years later and was driving the little Google car that would take, the Street View thing.
No way.
And he just said, hey, I'm in your province driving this Google car. Do you want to connect in person? After years and years and years of, and actually I think I read a stat that in many wedding parties now, at least one person is someone that people have met online in their wedding party.
That's so weird to think about, but it actually totally makes sense based on what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing with young adults. Yeah. And
so this male friendship recession that people are talking about, the amount of men who have 6 close friends being cut in half, I'm wondering if they're taking that in consideration. But from my perspective and what I see, I do see that. Like I think back to, I think about my own friendship, and I would say 6 close friends. Like what defines a close friend? Do you have 6 close friends, would you say?
Yeah, I would say I have 6 close friends.
Yeah.
But I'd say probably like about that.
Yeah.
Like 6 super close friends. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's why wedding parties are only about 4 to 6 people.
Yeah.
Some people have like huge wedding parties, but anyway, I digress. So that's one of the reasons they said that men are having fewer friendships. Another one is because men are working longer hours, or maybe even working at home more. So they're not going into the office. They're changing jobs more. The workforce, it seems to be way more transient then.
Yeah, both the workforce and just where we live seems more transient. Like I think most people I grew up with in high school, I don't know what the number is, but it's the vast majority don't live in the community that we all grew up in. So it's like we're all living an hour away from where we grew up in all different directions. Like there's just no way to, not no way. It's very difficult to maintain a healthy relationship and friendship with someone who lives an hour or 2 away from you. And that's just by necessity. Our jobs are taking us to places, and the ability to buy homes, at least where we live, is taking us to places that are way outside of our actual community where that relationship was kind of established and formed. So I can see that being a big part of it. Yeah,
I'm thinking if this is a rural or urban issue as well. Like I know growing up in a small town, many of the people had to leave there to find work elsewhere and things like that. But also, a lot of those guys, now that they are older, are moving back to their hometown and kind of hanging out with their nostalgic old friends. But I think also men are struggling with meaningful friendships because I think for the most part, we've been socialized to hide our vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Someone once said this quote, is that boys don't start out emotionally disconnected. They become emotionally disconnected. And I think from my experience, that's been true, where you start out open and kind of vulnerable,
right,
but then life just has a way of kind of chipping away or teaching us to just kind of keep to ourselves. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I would say that's been my experience. I try to fight against it, but the reality is like, in certain corners of the marketplace and certain corners of the public square, like it's risky to do that. It's risky to be vulnerable. It's risky to be open. It could cost you. It could cost your business. It could cost your reputation. And so we just learn over time to protect ourselves more and more and more because we've had bad experiences of risking vulnerability, right? But the trade-off of that is if you don't, like, vulnerability is a risk, and the reward is depth of relationship. A lack of vulnerability is also a risk, right?
Totally.
Like you may gain something by it, but what you lose is depth of relationship. And so, 100%. Maybe connected to the way our economy works or is working or has evolved over time. Maybe it's let us be more prone to self-preservation and self-protection. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, that whole self-protection thing is huge. I think too, like, I wonder if we've there's been a lot of talk of toxic masculinity over the past couple of years, and any hint of toxic masculinity or what has been previously known as being masculine, I think there's a hesitation around those spaces.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, in Winnipeg, we had a mechanical bull. Right. And so even when I'll be honest, as we were planning this, there was this like voice inside my head, and I don't, what voice is it or where is this coming from? But the idea to be perceived as like trying to be like extra masculine or something like by having a mechanical bull caused me just a moment of pause. And I had to fight against kind of that internal voice, because there are certain things that men typically, obviously on a whole, there's lots of guys that didn't enjoy the mechanical bull, but there are spaces and things that actually men are drawn to and build relationship in. And I think we have to like not apologize for those spaces, but at the same time, of course, learning to be respectful men. Yeah.
Like I would feel everything you're feeling, but then I'm like, I want to get on a mechanical bull so bad. And like, I know the majority of you do too. You're like, I don't want to try it. That'd be so fun. Like, that's just like, there's something in me that just wants to be in that space and to do that.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And and so I think, especially as, this is a Christian podcast. And so in the church and in Christian spaces, I think we should be careful not to be like, well, we've got to be careful of like, being like, what if it's okay to actually cook a lot of meat and have a steak night for men? Like maybe that's just okay.
Yeah.
Now let's be honest. Lots of guys kind of are like, well, I don't like steak, or I don't like,
really?
Some of these, I don't know. There are people that don't like steak. We'll pray for them.
Hypothetically.
But do you know what I mean? I think sometimes we're like, oh, well, we got to be careful. But I do think there's something to be said about spaces and activities that men are actually drawn to be friends together. And my question is, have we kind of eliminated those in response to toxic masculinity?
Yeah. I think what we're doing is, in the name of inclusivity, we're actually not really doing anything at all. Right. So it's like, well, we don't want to be too specific in the things that we do. We don't want to be too niche. We want to invite guys to that because they might have that sensitivity or they may not have that interest. So what we do is like, if it prevents us from actually doing anything at all, and then we actually aren't creating any spaces where we're getting to know each other. We're not bonding over shared experiences, because we're worried that we're going to plan something that makes some people feel like they're on the outside, or feel like they're doing something that they're not interested in.
Yeah, and let's be honest, there's so much in Scripture to be talked about of being hospitable to one another, thinking of the needs of other people before our own. And so don't hear what we're not saying. Like, we're not saying that you should just like forge ahead and try and build communities that like are not thinking about the guys that you want to connect with, or just building relationships with the guys that you are. What we're trying to say is there are actual things that men bond over, and we need to, if we want to have friendships, we need to make sure we're not just shutting those down or being afraid of spaces like fishing trips and things like let's lean into those spaces while keeping an eye open to make sure we're not leaving anyone out. But I think about like the bonds that are formed even walking through difficulty together, and like the whole idea of like liminal spaces. Have you heard of that at all?
Yeah, there's I think a writer named Alan Hirsch, who I've heard it from first, and the whole idea with like talks about communitas, which is like this bond that's formed between people who go through like a life-changing situation together, who fight in war together. The picture is like the war heroes who come home from war. They don't have to have anything similar in their history, in their background. They go to war together and they come back and they're bonded for life. The language of that is communitas. It's like this deep bond that is created by serving hard together, taking risks together, working hard at something, smoking a brisket for 12 hours. Like those are kind of bonds that are a lot more difficult to break than just like, surface level friendships that have no experience connected to them, or no deep in the trenches work connected to them. Yeah. And so I think we miss that a lot, because the people we work with aren't our friends. We move workplaces, and they can be, but we tend to move places, and we try to create distance between our work and our home and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of our work now is like, in an attention economy, a lot of our work is just kind of on our own, working from home on a screen. Like, we're not building things together. We're not fixing things. We're not problem solving together. And so we're missing the relationships that are bound there. But if we're not doing that kind of stuff outside, we're not going on camping trips, like backcountry camping trips. We're not like taking risks and
building a deck together.
Yeah. So we're not serving on mission together. We're not going on overseas missions trips together and experiencing like that bond that's formed through those kinds of things. And where is that community formed? Where's that communitas formed? It's formed in liminal spaces. Is the stuff that is the language that they use. And those liminal spaces are those kind of risky, uncertain gray zones where we're like, we got to rely on one another and to figure this out.
And I think that's why actually right now, like, there's a lot of people saying like, oh, is the church in trouble? What's the biggest threat to the church and all these types of things. From my experiences actually right now in Christian culture is churches, like church communities or Christian communities are actually kind of leaning into one another more because we're kind of in a day, like, I don't know about you, but like there just seems to be like an air of like, I think Mark Sayers describes it as like an ambient anxiety that's just kind of like pervasive throughout our society where, people are talking about the market right now and like what's going to happen. We're talking about food shortages and like, you see like a train derailment in Ohio that's people are saying like, oh, all these things are going into the atmosphere and into our water. There just seems to be like, and a part of that too is just our interconnectedness and our social media that just creates this anxiety that probably wouldn't exist otherwise. But I say all that to say, it seems as though we're in a bit of a weird space or this zone that we're unsure what's ahead. And so you're seeing people kind of lean in together. And so I think if you're a man and you're looking for friendship right now, the church is a great place to look because I think we're going through something together where our differences mean a lot less. Yeah. And we're kind of more united by the fact that we all love and serve Jesus and are following him.
Yeah. And united by the fact that we are all uncertain about what the future is, right? Like our investment portfolios are uncertain. Our growth plans are now not coming to fruition. What we expected with our kids is not what we're experiencing with their kids as they're growing up, right? Like all that is creating this weird gray zone space. And I'm experiencing this I live in Milton and I serve as a pastor in Milton, Ontario. And I've always felt called to be connected with the broader body of Christ in Milton and pastors and spiritual leaders in our community, have more of a relationship with them, be more unified as a body of Christ. I've always felt like principally called to that. And since starting this new role where I'm at, like there's been a point of intentionality to gather people, but it hasn't been hard work. It feels like people and spiritual leaders and pastors are actually being drawn to each other because of exactly what you're talking about. Like the things that have divided us in the past and sent us to our own kind of little circles and spheres of influence and then produced the loneliness that we're describing. Like those walls are now coming down and people are coming together again, celebrating our what bonds us, what connects us, what's mutual between us, and because of the uncertainty ahead of us. And I think God's going to use that for whatever the next thing He does in our city in Milton, and I think in the church in the 21st century and beyond. Like I think He's going to use these times and spaces if we step into them with awareness and intentionality.
Totally, I think that whole. As a ministry, we often encourage men's leaders and men's groups to do three things, and I may butcher this, and if I do, forgive me. But we talk about the heart, the head, and the hands, and we talk about how like we have to equip a man's head to become a follower of Jesus and to learn what it means to, but we also have to ignite a man's heart, and we have to get them passionate about mission and those types of things. But the one thing that we often encourage is to engage a man's hands. Yeah, because we find when men, this is a podcast for men, that when men are engaging their hands together, especially like you said, you had mentioned mission trips and you mentioned, but like when men are leaning into like uncertainty together, relationship grows that you seemingly can't find anywhere else. Yeah. Like and it's no matter like if you leave for a couple months and you come back, it's like we still shared that same experience of building that deck or doing this thing that often becomes the center of conversation or becomes our anchor. Now, thankfully, as Christians, we have an anchor. We have the fact that actually we're the church. We expect that troubles will come. Jesus said, take heart, you will experience trouble, but I've overcome the world. And so as a church, I think actually we're going to see men's friendships become easier to build because I think as we live in more uncertain of a day and of a culture, we're going to feel we're in that kind of like pressure cooker together a little bit more. And so I do have a lot of hope for men's relationships. I don't think the narrative has to be like, if we keep on the same track, then like men won't have 3 close friends in like 5 to 10 years. But I don't see that. I actually see, especially within Christian circles, that there's going to be some dynamic, good friendships. Now, Andrew, I'm curious what you think are some of the keys to deep male friendships. What are some of the keys that you think that we must have if we want to kind of go deep? Yeah,
one of the common things that we talk about a lot is the word vulnerability, the language of vulnerability. It's not new, but it seems to be new in men's conversations, or at least in our cultural context. Like it seems to be something that's rising to the top as a primary focus point of conversation. The idea of like the men what we struggle with, or at least what they say we struggle with, is actually being vulnerable, being open,
Right.
sharing our feelings, sharing our thoughts, we're good at sharing our opinions, but even then we struggle with like putting ourselves on the line. We struggle with like stating something because it's risky. We struggle with expressing a fear or an anxiety or sharing a brokenness with one another. There's no way to relationship without that.
Yeah.
As married people, we know that there's no way to relationship with our spouse without vulnerability. With God, we know that there's no way to relationship with God without vulnerability. The beautiful thing with God is that he does know everything about us. He sees it all. And our work is just being reminded of that and living into that reality. But with one another, we can hide those things, and we can keep from each other and hold back from one another. And the truth is, like, all we're actually pursuing in life and what we deeply desire more than almost anything is to be known and to know one another. That's what vulnerability is. And so, yeah, one of the things is just leading in vulnerability. Be the guy who steps in and leads the way with vulnerability, not the guy who's like, here's all my problems, take care of them all for me. That's not vulnerability, right? I think that's like emotional carelessness in some kind of way, but steps into it courageously and establishes a culture of freedom and vulnerability, because guys are dying to hear from you, honestly, so that they feel like, oh yeah, me too, finally somebody said it. And also they're dying to like support you and care for you, and then share stuff so that they can be supported and cared for.
Totally. I think the level of your depth of friendship is your level of willingness to be vulnerable. And I once heard someone say of like the idea of giving the gift of going second, where like so many guys are just kind of begging and wanting their friendships to be more than just surface level. They go out to a party or they hang out at a gathering and they go home and they're just like, all we talked about was what do I do for work? How are things? Busy. Right. How are the kids doing in sports? And what vacations are you taking this year? Right. And they're just like, man, I want more than that. And so the idea is be vulnerable and go first and say, hey, I'm wrestling with this. And you'll be shocked at how like willing people are to follow that up with say, yeah, me too. And so it's the idea of giving guys the gift of going second by going first. And you'll see that guys kind of bare their souls when you say, hey, like, I've been wrestling with this. What about yourself? In fact, I think about a young man that I was mentoring for 8 years. And I talked about my own journey, told my own story. And oftentimes he would not say anything. 8 years later, I get a phone call. And it's like in the middle of the night. And he said, Jordan, I need to tell you this. And he said, you know why I knew I could tell you that? Is because remember that time we were going for a drive many years ago where you talked about your own story and your own struggles? He said, I knew that I could actually open up to you because you opened up to me. And even this is someone with an age gap, but I just in vulnerability and obviously in wisdom, I'm not dumping on this, this young man, my own dirt or my own, sinful past, but just creating a space where I was communicating that it's actually safe to share in this space. And so now because of that, it's one of my deepest relationships and friendships because there's this shared vulnerability. Yeah. And so there's obviously wisdom and all those types of things, but I just think if you want to be vulnerable, if you want deep relationships, vulnerability is key. The second is intentionality.
Yeah. It actually kind of connects to it. Like, being vulnerable in the wrong space is loose. It's careless, and it actually is, it's risky.
Yeah.
And it can really hurt a relational dynamic. But being vulnerable in the right space, i.e. like being intentional about the spaces you create, the people you're spending time with, and the purpose behind them, is what can actually create the recipe for safe and secure and genuine vulnerability. Yeah,
totally. I think oftentimes when it comes to our relationships as men, we're not very intentional, which is interesting because men can be very intentional people. Where they like, I know people that like they mow their grass on the same day of every week. They have certain rhythms and they just kind of put into their schedule, and not all guys are like this. I don't lean this way, but some guys, they just are intentional with so many areas of their lives outside of their relationships. And so like, it's not a wrong thing to connect with the guys on Thursday evenings on your calendar. That can be a really good thing.
Yeah.
And so I think we just have to be very intentional about relationships and even just be clear with like the whole expectations of, what is this? What are we seeking to get out of this friendship?
Yeah, we do this a lot, guys. I don't know if you're like this, but you're like, hey, let's hang out, or let's grab let's go grab wings or something like that. And it's like, hey, people show up to just grab wings, and it's like, I don't know. I've got a 4-year-old, and I'm starting to see her develop friendships, And it makes me cringe sometimes because like a kid will come up and be like, "Hey, Winona, will you be my friend?" And her response is always, "Yeah, of course I'll be your friend." And you're like, have we lost the art of like actually being intentional? Like, hey, like I kind of want friends. Like we're similar season of life. We live near each other. We like the same things. Like, you know, do you want to become friends or do you want to grow in friendship? Or like, let's grab wings because like I kind of need some friends and you might too. Like this, instead of it just being the games on in the background, like this weird ambiguous, what is the whole purpose of this hangout? Like, what does it look like to be intentional about it? And then state your intentions. That's the vulnerability piece, is stating your intentions with the gathering, with the time, with the space. Obviously, in the right way, because you could be like that real weird guy who, you know.
Like, hey, you want to be best friends?
Yeah, to everybody. You know
did we just become best friends? Yeah.
But yeah, it's really important. Intentionality is really important. And intentionality on the other side too, like some people may be coming into a space and they're expecting best friendship with you. Yeah. And like, that's not what your expectation is with the space. You might be mentoring someone, they're looking for best friendship. You're like, oh no, I'm here to help you, right?
Yeah, or like, just like, you know, maybe you're in a Bible study with a bunch of guys and maybe it becomes aware that the idea is that we're just going to become best friends. And sometimes that would be awesome. That's ideal when that happens. But sometimes it's actually very okay for Christian community to be just Christian community. And I think that's where like when it comes to intentionality and expectations is to actually measure our expectations based on like what we expect to get out of this. And I think sometimes I've gone into friendships and I've met people and I think I didn't, you know, you get in and you realize that maybe we don't have a lot of things in common. Mm-hmm. Maybe their personality's a little bit quirky. Maybe I'm a little bit quirky. Maybe we just seem totally different. And if your expectation is just to be like these like best friends that are, you know, for the rest of your life, you're going to leave disappointed.
Yeah.
But I think one of the great things about Christian community is that actually Christian community is being able to be in deep relationship with people that have nothing in common with you.
Yeah.
You know, I think about that Ephesians passage where it talks about like the wall of hostility being broken down between Jew and Gentile. The gospel opens up a whole new family of believers where like there's no Jew or Greek, there's no male or female. Like the gospel communicates something that you can't find anywhere else, that two people with nothing in common can actually have deep sense of family and belonging.
Yeah.
I think we've lost that a little bit when it comes to male friendships, is because we assume that we've got to like them. They've got to be like us,
right? And
we've got to do something that I find enjoyable.
Yeah,
but the gospel and the Bible gives a greater picture of community than that.
It does. Yeah, Christian community transcends just that best friend vision. Some of us, we feel burned going into Christian community, expecting that, especially sometimes like the leader of the community, if we don't feel like we're getting friendship, but they're not calling us in the week, asking us to hang out, like you feel like you're burned, and their vision for that community might transcend just that friendship thing. They may have really good friends. Sometimes I feel like I'm calling people into community, but I do have really good friends over here that these are my core guys. These are my best friends, and I only have so much capacity for so many of them. And that's not what I'm offering everybody. What I can offer everybody in my midst or in my community is genuine Christian community. And it's so much, it's different than, but it actually transcends that kind of niche friendship thing that we're all kind of chasing. Yeah. It's more beautiful. It's more diverse. It's more inclusive. It can be with anybody and everybody, no matter what the season of life that they're in, no matter what their level of maturity in their faith is. Like, it can be the space where we can find accountability, we can find love, we can find mutual care, we can find support, we can find help with raising our kids, we can find, all sorts of really, really great and beneficial things that the kingdom of God promises us through the family of God. Totally. And Christian community. It may not be what our vision of friendship is, or
fun. Yeah, I've wrestled this a lot, man, over the past couple of years, because like the world offers friendship based around commonalities. Is that the right word? About things in common. Like the world offers friendship around hobbies and gender and interests and all these types of things. The world offers friendship based around people that think and look the same. Right. The church should be a space where like people look into what's happening in the church. Like, how do these people get along?
Right.
And how do they love each other so much? How does like a young adult find friendship and meaningful community with a 65-year-old retiree. You know, that I believe can only be done in the person of Jesus Christ and in the local church. And so I think as we talk about male friendships, I think setting our expectations and our intentionality is realizing that actually it can look very different than what kind of the Kool-Aid that we drink and the waters that we swim in. We can have friendships with people that really you probably think that you can't have friendships with. At the same time, it just may look different than your best friends that you kind of just like totally unwind with, like you said, or, you know, that you would bare your soul with. But there is something beautiful about Christian community that transcends the typical friendship dynamic that we often talk about.
Yeah. And that's available for everybody.
Exactly.
I think it's it is a promise. It's an invitation for us. And it's a promise that it can be found if we're sincere about centering Jesus.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And so vulnerability, intentionality. And then the last thing, Andrew, that I think is a key of building deep friendships and deep, you know, community is reliability.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, I think as Christians, I don't know, maybe this is not a Christian thing, but as men, it's easy to just be like, hey, yo, let's get together. Yeah, we should chat soon. I was at the airport recently and I met a guy that's in the kind of the Christian leadership and he runs some ministries in the GTA. And it just came out of my mouth. Like, I'll probably never talk to this guy again, but I would. He seems amazing. He seems awesome. But I'm like, yeah, we'll chat soon. And then walk away and I'm going, when am I going to chat with him soon?
Right.
And so there's a sense of reliability of, in these communities, in these friendships with other men that you were saying, hey, I want to lean into, I want to be friends with these guys. What does it look like to be a reliable friend?
Yeah, I noticed that even playing softball, just to be a non-church example, because as a pastor, it might come across as like, be reliable, i.e. show up every week to church and serve and be, because that's what the pastor wants you to do. But the principle stands true outside of that. Like on my softball team last year, there were a couple of guys who like signed up, got the jersey, and showed up 3 times out of the whole season. And their relationship was just different. They didn't get integrated to the team. They didn't know each other very well. Everybody, there's a cloud of mystery around them kind of thing. They weren't reliable. They didn't stand by their commitment. They didn't step into it. They didn't keep showing up, whether it was easy, when it was hard. It was just whenever it was convenient for them, they kind of popped their head back in. And that's no way to establish a relationship. That's no way to build friendship. That's no way to actually grow in Christian community. A reliability, showing up, saying you're going to show up, being intentional about it, stating it ahead of time, and then actually showing up and being reliable, being somebody who says like, hey, yeah, I'd love to hang out. Let's grab coffee, and being the person to initiate that and actually showing up for that, not the person who like their schedule happens to get too busy every week and they have to keep moving it on, canceling on you. Being someone who shows up to a community. The people who really form these relationships in community are the ones who show up on a regular weekly basis, and that's where beautiful relationship is found. That's where beautiful community is found, is those who continue to show up. There's a commonality in showing up. There's trust in showing up.
I mean, if I quit every time that a relationship was a little awkward and just like leaned out when things were just kind of a little bit rough, if I didn't keep showing up, I will actually be missing out right now on some key relationships. Yeah. Because I would have thought, we're not really it didn't really drive well. I don't really get their humor or whatever the case may be. If I just said, okay, I'm going to stop showing up, then I wouldn't have some of these deep friendships that are people like, it's funny. I look at like my groomsmen in my wedding party, nearly all of them are nothing like me. And I think part of that is because, you know, you keep showing up, or you keep showing up to, whether it's your men's small group or your Sunday morning, or if you're serving on the welcome team, or those are great spaces to keep showing up. And I once heard the idea of showing up and the 3 ways that you can show up to build a relationship quickly. And the first is to show up personally, and that just means like actually physically be there. And so, you know, if you have a friend and they have something on, try and be there if you can be there. The second is show up mentally. It's one thing to show up personally and be there in the flesh, but just mentally you're checked out, and everybody in the room can tell that you just are like waiting for the party to be over so you can go home, or waiting for the small group to be done so you can just like head towards the door. So show up personally, but show up mentally. Lean in and ask questions as to like, hey, what's new? And, you know, actually mean, how you doing? But also show up randomly. Now, I don't mean just like show up at a guy's house and knock on his door and be like, hey, I'm here. But there's times that like maybe it's not like expected for you to show up in someone's life, but it's nice for you to show up in someone's life. And so I just think, like, for example, a friend of mine today just had a interview for a like a D-Min or a PhD program at a school in out east. Wow. And he had an interview today, and he told me he had an interview a couple weeks ago. So what I did was I made note on my phone to say, hey, I know he has a big interview today. And so I kind of showed up randomly in our friendship and said, hey, how was the interview today? Yeah. And so there's show up personally, like actually show up in the flesh, whether it's a small group or to whatever's happening. Show up mentally, like be engaged, and then show up randomly. Those are 3 ways you can show up and be reliable as a friend. I'll be honest. Reliability for me is probably the hardest thing for me to follow through and to be good at. I mentioned not showing up to your brisket cookouts or whatever.
You're doing great.
And so forgive me.
You keep having babies. Is right what I do with them. So
come on, man.
It's okay.
Come on. You seem to have a greater capacity for this type of stuff than me.
I'm wired for it, and that's not a boast. That's just there's a lot of things I'm terrible at, like administrative work, right? So
just ask this administrator.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, which one? So no, it comes more naturally to some than others. I'm an extrovert. I'm a hard extrovert. Like it's so core to who I am.
Are you still an extrovert after COVID? Like I feel like my
I'm more so.
Really?
Yeah, I read less now than I did for COVID. Like there's something like, I don't know. It's emphasized the parts of my personality. One of the things I was thinking about with the reliability thing, and I kind of said this to our community recently, was it's like, everybody says about marriage, and a lot of you married guys out there, especially those who have been listening, have been married like 20 years plus. You know this and you've said this to me, and I haven't trusted you, and I'm starting to trust you. I just celebrated 7 years last week, and I am starting to believe you in when you say, like, trust me, it gets better after year 15 or year 20, or like it's best in year 30, and you're like, how? All my youthfulness is gone. And the truth, that's it stands true in community as well. Everything I've been listening to recently, and from my own personal experience, is that community, its best fruit is produced like year 10 and year 15. In year 20. What we do a lot with church stuff is we jump in and we jump out, and we sometimes move around here, and we connect with this guy here for 6 months and that guy here, and we're so transient with our relationships that we never actually experience the fruit of longevity in the same way as relationships, right? But the same principle is true. Like, like the first couple of years of marriage, we're like, oh, maybe, hopefully, like, depending, but pretty good. And then things got real hard, and for me at least they did, and so it feels like we're reaching the time in our relationship where it's like, oh, we're hitting the 9-year mark of being together and knowing each other, and the fruit of the 9-year, the 12-year, the 15-year is starting to be experienced, and it can only be experienced through reliability. And I wonder
if it's partly due to the fact that you guys went through that liminal space of having kids.
It has an impact for sure.
You know what I mean? Of just that like uncertainty, and late, you're up, and that kind of the just to be frank, like having kids is amazing, but also having kids can be very tough on a relationship, and so I think coming out of the young early years that you guys are right now, we're still in the middle of them. Mm-hmm. There's something beautiful that's built. There's seeds that's sown amidst difficulty in those early years that you see the fruit of, like you said, just many years later.
Yeah, and I think we need to treat our churches like that, Like I really honor, there are times where I come across people who attend a local church that they have reasonable concerns about or frustrations with. But I really honor the people who stick through that. Depending on, I'm not saying that's perfect for everyone, I'm not saying that needs to stand true for everybody. I understand moving things around. I'm not at the same church I was a couple years ago, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. But I honor those who are like, no, but we're sticking with this community. This not because we're closed to everything else, not because we're closed-fisted, but because we understand that the fruit of this kingdom relationship is going to be most experienced, best experienced, like if we stick with it, rather than if we break from it and try something new constantly. And I think that speaks to reliability as like a really important principle.
Vulnerability, intentionality, reliability. Andrew, as we're just talking here, I'm thinking about, this is a podcast for young men, and I know a ton of young men that are just generally lonely. And I think the young adult years, especially if you graduate your university years and you're kind of and you're a single adult male, especially, and you haven't entered into some sort of relationship, trying to find your way as a single male can be really difficult. But even young marrieds and those in relationship, the young adult years can be isolating and alone if there's no like young adult program at your church or those types of things. Just like us to maybe, we didn't plan on speaking about this, but maybe some ideas on where do guys start to begin to build relationships, and maybe let's just say, unfortunately, the local church is not always a great space for young guys to find people like themselves. And so if you do have a young adult program, that's obviously a good starting point, but like, let's talk about the places this, a lot of my friends where the church isn't a space right now where they can find young friends. What would you say to someone like that?
I'd say use your hands and serve.
Yeah.
Your church is desperate for you to serve, whether it's with the kids, whether it's on tech and media, whether it's just greeting people. Like, people are desperate to walk into church and see a face that is friendly and youthful and vibrant, and that's what's going to gather people of your generation. If people are coming and checking out the church and they're seeing you there at the front door, connecting with people through serving together is those liminal spaces where bonds are formed. We did some church planning in the past, and there's guys that are totally different than each other who are now bound together quite strongly. And the guys I think very highly of, and I think we'll have a long-standing relationship with, because we were there at 7:30 a.m. Setting up. We were there serving together. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't like, here's my friends who are like similar to me.
Right.
It was like, okay, well, they're not here. We don't have this large young adult community. How can I start? I can use my hands and I can work hard at something. I can create something. Right. I don't have to build a young adults ministry. I could just serve on the tech team. And maybe teenagers are going to start to gather. There's a great place to serve as youth ministry. Like, find people to serve alongside, no matter what their background is. And you'll start to learn things about them and experience relationship with them that you couldn't have imagined just finding by just creating some sort of, small group or something like that of like-minded people.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think too, like, outside of the church, that's exactly the thing I would say to someone that wants to start, that's attending church. One of the things that really surprised me was getting involved in a hobby that was offline, that in a non-Christian space was actually really cool. So, like, a couple years ago, I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was awesome. And I was amazed at, especially in the martial arts community and Jiu-Jitsu in particular, because it is a liminal space. You're basically simulating
fighting for your life.
You're simulating fighting for your life, and so you kind of build this bond with these people, and you go to competition together. I built some really great friends there, and what you actually find is other believers that are in those spaces, and so they might not attend your local church, but they attend another church. But at least you're kind of building friends with people, non-Christian and Christian alike, and that to me was like really eye-opening. And even just like I mentioned, the whole like vintage furniture thing, like finding interest that like you can actually meet these people in real life. And I have met people from that hobby that I wouldn't have met otherwise. And though some are online, some are in person, but that's something that I would say too, is like to have a hobby that's in the flesh that, do you know what I mean by in the flesh?
Yeah, like you're embodied, like and real
there. People.
It's not a video game or on Discord, even though those aren't terrible places to develop friendships. Yeah.
Exactly. I know friends that their best friends are online. I'm not belittling that, but I do think there's something to be said about sitting across from real people. And so, guys, if you're watching and you say, man, I just would love some deeper friendships, I hope these 3 things kind of stick out to you, intentionality, vulnerability, and reliability. And we just hope, man, start today. Like, there's no reason to wait. Reach out to that person that maybe you've been meaning to connect with. Be clear about your expectations, and hopefully it's the beginning of something special that kind of we've gotten to enjoy as friends, but also we believe that it's possible for you as well. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next month.